Roundtable. Thank you. And Crystal's reminding us that this session will be recorded. I'm Thomas Endicott. I'm a senior program manager with Bonneville Environmental Foundation. These are roundtables that are a collaboration between BEF and Forth, and we really appreciate all of Forth's work on putting these together. We've got a great panel, a great presentation today. I'm excited with one presentation to start, and then sort of a roundtable panel of 3 representatives from utilities that are geographically different and also a little bit different size. So our topic is effective program design and incentives for electric vehicles, and I will turn it over to Kelly Urich from Forth.
That's exciting.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for that introduction, Thomas. Sorry, I'm just seeing a notification here. Yes, unmute myself. Okay, I'm assuming everyone can hear me. And then just a friendly reminder that if you're not a speaker, please do keep yourself muted for right now. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. I have not been to one of these roundtables in a while, but excited to be here today and hear from our wonderful speakers. So as Thomas mentioned, and as you probably are aware, this roundtable is all about effective program design and incentives. And so first we'll be hearing from Aaron Kressig of Western Resource Advocates. He's a transportation electrification manager. And he'll be sort of giving an overview of utility transportation electrification plans, some best practices and good examples from across the US. And then we're going to sort of zoom into the Pacific Northwest here with a couple of speakers from utilities in the region. So first up, we'll have Juan Serpamunos from Eugene Water and Electric Board. Then we'll follow him up with Jeremy Stewart from Tacoma Power. And then finally, we'll finish the panel out with Phil Cameron from Energy Conservation Works. And so with that foundation laid for us, I'm going to turn it right over to Aaron to get us started.
Thanks, Kelly. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining and having me on to speak today. So yeah, I'm Aaron Kressig with Western Resource Advocates. I'm going to be talking today about a white paper that we put together called Best Practices in Utility Transportation Electrification Plans. That's built off of our research, our advocacy work in the Intermountain West, as well as our research on utility plans from around the country. So with that said, next slide, please. So just a quick background on who we are. So Western Resource Advocates, or WRA, is a conservation organization with more than 30 years of experience in the interior West. So we work in this 7-state footprint you see on the map here on the right. We really focus on in the 5-state region of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. We do land conservation, clean energy, and water conservation work. Though I work in the clean energy program, which is our largest program. Next slide, please. So speaking specifically about our work in the transportation electrification space, so our clean energy advocacy has always focused on public utilities commissions in our region. And that has traditionally been about energy efficiency, renewable energy, but as everyone here is well aware, electric vehicles have become a more prominent topic over the last few years, and electric utilities have been a big player in that space. So we've been sort of engaging ad hoc in EV policy issues as they came up at our utility commissions for the last 5 or so years. But then I think, about 2.5 years ago, realizing that this was becoming an increasingly active space, we created the Transportation Electrification Program, working with our investor-owned utilities on their EV infrastructure plans. So since then, it's been incredibly busy. As again, I know all of you know, it's just like the space has just gotten so busy so quickly. And in that time, we've helped support pro-BEV legislation in all of our states. In particular, getting legislation to require investor-owned utilities to file transportation electrification plans. And after that, we helped secure last year over $300 million in utility investment in our region. We've engaged with every investor-owned utility in our region on their plans, intervened at utility commissions, sometimes supporting, sometimes advocating for improvements to the plans that they brought forward. And in our EV work, we also do work outside of the utility space, particularly on zero emission vehicle standards and other state level policies to accelerate EV adoption. Next slide, please. So just a little background on the paper, and I think, you know, before I get into that, I was mentioning that we've really focused on investor-owned utilities, and I think the reason for that is that, you know, as a advocacy-based organization, you know, we have an entry point at the Public Utility Commission level to get involved and make meaningful changes. So that's why those utilities have been our focus. But I think what excites me about the opportunity to talk about this paper with you all is that, you know, this paper that we wrote is really about program design and about, you know, utilities bringing forward transportation electrification programs that are comprehensive at addressing the barriers facing EV charging today. So, like I said, although we worked with IOUs mostly, I think the lessons here are very applicable to, you know, cooperatives and municipal utilities. So with that in mind, just a little background of what the paper is about, and you can see it's a mouthful title. Unfortunately, it's what wonky papers seem to have long titles, and ours is no exception. But if we send the slides around, you can get the link to the paper itself here. It's about 20 pages, and it looks at the things that it does is it breaks down, having examined, you know, dozens of utility programs, like what are the categories of investment that utilities invest in, and then it talks about some of the best practices that we have proposed based on experience working with these utility plans and examining ones outside of our region, and also talks about cross-cutting considerations that we think utility plans should consider, such as equity, load management, education and outreach to pair with actual investments in charging itself. And then just one more, I think, really important plug for the paper is that we provide actual links to filings. When we were sort of doing some of this background stuff, we've noticed that it's like really hard to like actually get to the point where you're like, oh, that's a cool program. How do I actually get to the place where it's described in nuts and bolts? So we found those, and they're linked in also. If you're reading the paper and you're like, well, this program that Public Service Company of New Mexico did is really cool, you can actually click and like read the actual filing to get more program specifics if you're interested, which I think is a valuable component of it. So next slide, please. So what are the categories of utility programs that are covered? So I'm not going to list out all of these, but I think what you see here on the left side of the screen here is that we have noticed that there's lots of different buckets of our market segments of charging that utilities can focus on. And I think what we've learned is that each one of these plays a really important role in accelerating the availability of EV charging. And so we encourage utilities to really take a focus on each one of these things, especially like the top, especially the charging infrastructure focused ones, such as single family, multifamily, workplace, etc. Because each one plays an important role, and the considerations for how to develop a good program differ significantly with each of these. And that's really what we get into in the paper. And outside of just sort of the traditional charging stuff, there's other interesting things that we've noticed, like engagement on electric school buses, which has been something that's come up a lot. Vehicle rebates, some utilities are even offering rebates for low-income customers to help get them into EVs. And then a catch-all category of miscellaneous goodies, which is just cool things that utilities are doing that don't really fit into any of these other things. And I'll touch on some cool examples of that here in a bit. And then on the right here, you just see, this is kind of what each section looks like. It's like, for example, if we're talking about single family, it's a description of what that is, why it's important for, the overall EV adoption picture, the best practices that we've identified. And then we actually list out a couple model programs that we think are really good examples. And we provide sort of a description of each of those, as well as a link to the filing if you're interested to dig in further. Next slide, please. So just an example, like this is what our highlighted program, this is kind of what the things that we touch on, like what's a good program? How about, on-bill financing for residential level 2 chargers, so that customers who, want to get a level 2 charger don't have to cover all the cost up front. They can actually pay back their utility through monthly payments over the course of 8 to 10 years, so that, they're able to get a level 2 charger without, having to front the upfront costs. And at the same time, the utility its ratepayers are getting fully reimbursed over time for the investment they made in that level 2 charger. Kind of a win-win, I think, for ratepayers and also for the individual customers to have access to a level 2 charger without having to front all that money. We've seen this in a couple of places in our region, and this is just as an example. Xcel Energy in both New Mexico and Colorado has this program. Next slide. So, also I think, it's important to think outside the box. When utilities are bringing plans forward, what are types of transportation outside of personal vehicle ownership that can be important to address. This can particularly be important to address from an equity perspective. Folks that aren't able to own their own car might find it easier, they might not use a car regularly, but you can still provide an electrified solution that can help them with that. And, that's like e-bikes or e-car shares, or, electrifying transit, school buses are all good examples of that. A couple cool examples of that is Tucson Electric has proposed a electric bike rebate as a part of their program, which I think is really cool, targeting low-income customers. And Xcel Energy in Colorado has an electric car share program that they're partnering with some local groups on to develop and support. So those are just cool examples of how utilities can get involved in more innovative ways to support electric vehicles and electrified transportation at large. And then just some other things is like, when it comes to like a mindset for the program, we try to do is, promote is like, how can a utility best optimize fuel switching through their programs, accelerate transportation electrification for all communities, particularly those that wouldn't be accessing that form of transportation without the utility involvement. Next slide, please. So just a couple of other things. So outside of like the specific program categories, I mentioned earlier, there's some things we call cross-cutting considerations. So for example, load management, we encourage utilities to be using their infrastructure programs to get folks on time differentiated rates, on the residential managed charging programs, and other things that are going to, you're going to provide a rebate to reduce the upfront cost of charging infrastructure. At the same time, you should be requiring those customers to be charging in a way that's going to provide benefit to the grid and all other ratepayers. That's sort of that's something that manifests itself in various sectors, from single family homes to commercial fast chargers to multifamily housing. So that's an example of what we talk about with cross-cutting considerations. Equity, we think that equity should be addressed in all of the different portfolios of investment. So offering increased rebates or other program features that take into consideration the unique challenges that lower income customers face in getting access to EV charging. And then education and outreach, we think, should be happening for all the programs. Next slide, please. So then just other things to consider is like how to make the program flexible so that it's able to respond to changing customer demands. Thinking about different ownership types, where does it make sense for the utility to own everything? Where does it make sense for them to take a more hands-off approach? I think we don't have a overarching opinion about utility ownership is bad or good. I think for us, it kind of depends on what the segment is. Some segments utility ownership can be useful, and in other places we think it's kind of unnecessary and potentially detrimental to program success. So those are some other considerations that are discussed in the plan, in the paper. Next slide. So yeah, that's an overview of what the paper is. There's definitely a lot more detail in the paper itself, and we're available, myself and Deborah Kavloff, my colleague, the authors of this paper, to talk further about what's in there or answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. So before we move on to Juan, I'm curious if there are any questions from the audience that you'd want to ask of Aaron related to the report. He'll be available for the Q&A coming up at the end too, but and we have some prepared questions for that discussion, but just wanted to take a pause and see if there are any questions now before we move on. You can either drop those in the chat, or I believe we can have, I believe there's an opportunity. You can raise your hand and we should be able to invite you to join on the mic. Although, Crystal, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not seeing any raised hands though, so. All right, we'll give it another minute. Aaron, I might ask while we move on to some of the other presentations. I know you said the link would be available in the PowerPoint that will be sent out after this webinar, but do you think you could drop the link in the chat in case folks want to check that out a bit sooner? Thank you. Perfect. All right. Well, without any immediate questions for Aaron, we'll go ahead and move on to Juan from Eugene Water and Electric Board. Juan, you can get started. Feel free to introduce yourself a bit further if you'd like.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Juan Serpa Munoz with EWEB, Eugene Water and Electric Board. I manage our electrification, energy efficiency, and solar efforts. And today I'm going to share a little bit about our program. It's only 4 slides, so it should be quick. EWEB is a utility with around 85 residential customers and 10,000 commercial customers. We're Oregon's largest customer-owned utility. And we provide electricity and water to the Eugene community, as well as parts of East Springfield and the Mackenzie River Valley area. And I want to highlight here on the first slide, actually, we can go back to the initial slide, that all our programs are made possible by the Oregon Clean Fuels program. And that has been a tremendous help and support for everything that we've done on the transportation electrification side. Next slide, please. Some concepts that I try to consider and have in mind and definitely implement as I look at any programs, including transportation electrification, is the concept of these that you see, availability versus accessibility. So although something may be available, it's not necessarily accessible. So how do we bridge that gap? A vehicle may be available to purchase, but it's not necessarily accessible by everyone. Also, bringing the equitable access piece is completely different than increasing adoption. A doctor who may not be sure about range on an electric vehicle doesn't really care if there's a $1,000 rebate or a $2,000 rebate with that person's salary. Whereas a limited income individual who's worrying about rent and medicine, whether you provide a $10,000 rebate on a $24,000 vehicle or a $34,000 vehicle or something like that, it's really quite a gap for them to access that. So you have to see that there's different lifts that you have to do, and the programs have to target these sectors in a different way. You want to increase adoption, that's one piece. You want to bring equitable access, that's a completely different piece. And one program cannot just be said that they will do both things. And as you move forward, you got to be intentional. These are different utilities that we have. Some may have larger budgets, some may have smaller budgets, but at least be intentional in the approach that you're taking on these accessibility, availability, equitable access, adoption. So although you try to do something, you understand that because of budget or other limitations, you cannot, but at least you have the intent and your program is trying to capture these gaps and barriers in the design of them. And then lastly, and by no means the least important is collaboration. A lot of the efforts that we've done at EWEB had been just with partnerships from the city, Fourth, other utilities, or me trying to run up on a program and calling another utility saying, hey, you know, how did you do that? I'm not sure how that's going to work. Or somebody calling me and say, what happened with that? Did that work? Did that not work? And I think that's a really great component of this environment that we have, that we can talk to each other and ask questions, and having a great resource like Fourth as well that is able to help us. So next slide, please. And so the programs that we have are divided in these sections. We have EWEB owned infrastructure, and that's level 2, and we're looking at providing DCFC. Level 2 is free for customers to use, and DCFC will likely be extremely accessible as far as cost. And we're working with infrastructure to be assisted with batteries to reduce the issue with demand and components of that. We also have commercial and residential charging station rebates and incentives. And on the commercial side, if it's affordable housing, we have increased incentives. And again, that's where we touch a little bit on the accessibility, but also the social equity component. We have an e-bike rebate that has been extremely popular as of today. With 3 months of having that program, we have 266 rebates that we process, and likely more. We're expanding that to 2 rebates per household or electric accounts. And that is another way to perhaps bring more access to electric transportation that is, at least in some ways, a lower cost. Of course, for limited income individuals, an ownership of an electric bicycle may still be difficult, but I think we're able to access other individuals with lesser barriers to access transportation in this manner. In car sharing, that's a partnership with Fourth and other utilities in the area to be able to bring access to the technology outside of vehicle ownership. And we have one currently at an affordable housing location, one for the entire city, and we're waiting for another one to come online for the city. And some really great stories are coming out of these efforts, especially on the affordable housing one. We don't have time to discuss those, but it's doing what you would intend to do on something to bring access, so the individuals are able to access these programs in this specific one. And then community grants, I think that's what I'm most excited about, because we're not experts in all the gaps in accessing technology. And so by having these community grants, we give the opportunity to individuals to push for programs that they think would help the community. And this is only open to nonprofits, government, educational institutions. And so we're looking forward to what these will be. The period ends at the end of this month for submitting grants. And so we'll be able to provide funding to support these various efforts. And then if something seems exciting and interesting enough, we may just pull it as our own effort and help expand it in a much greater way. So this is a great way to put money into the hands of the experts in addressing the gaps that their communities may have. We have test drive events and also education. And the education kind of goes with the test drive events, just trying to increase awareness of electric mobility and the various benefits that can bring. Next slide, please. And the last component, and this is not meant for you to look at each single graph here and understand it, but is that we've been getting a lot into data analytics and analyzing what is happening with the programs throughout, whether it's energy efficiency, solar, or electrification, transportation in this case. And it helps us understand that we're doing what we're thinking we're doing. Some of the results here show us that adoption of these technologies like solar and other pieces tend to go to those neighborhoods where people have lesser financial barriers. And that's no news, but it's interesting to just see that the data is showing that. What kind of vehicles are being purchased in our service territory? What's the trajectory? So what kind of port should we have? Where are people getting the electric bicycles? Are they mostly online, or is it local shops? So who do we partner with? So looking at the analytics, which I think is really fantastic. And it's not that the information that you find when you hope to do something. For me, the value is in finding questions that you didn't realize you had to ask until you see the data and what is coming through. So that's something that I would encourage, definitely evaluating your programs and trying to see it through different lenses. Graphs are great. See something mapped on a map tells a different story. And also as you're trying to communicate that to other individuals, your board, and trying to get support for different measures or different paths to take, for example. With that, thank you very much. And that's all that I have for today. Thanks. I look forward to the questions.
Thanks, Juan. And actually, since this is a pretty specific question directed just at you, I might go ahead and offer it up now. A question in the chat: are there any concerns of the portability and resale of rebated e-bikes?
Yeah, definitely. There are some concerns with that, but we also have to understand just the potential benefits of it. And one of the questions that will be asked later, but this is kind of like the benefit of having funding from clean fuels, that we can take a little bit more risk in these efforts and push programs that otherwise would not have a traditional return on investment that can be supported by regular funds. So yeah, those concerns are definitely there. And we try to address them through our guidelines and requirements, but of course, we're not going to capture all those. And if somebody wants to commit fraud or not follow the system, then of course there's opportunities to do that. But yeah, it's definitely a concern, and we try to manage it, as best as we can. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks for that response, Juan. I'm also curious if, as we move on to Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind, if there's a central URL you could direct us to check out your website, where we can get like some of the specific details about those rebates that you discussed, and
The
potentially
specific-
the community grant.
Okay, I can share a general to our Move Green efforts. Yes, I can.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. All right, so next up we have, apologies for the dog barking. We've got Jeremy Stewart from Tacoma Power, who's going to talk a bit about their programs. So take it away, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Kelly. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeremy Stewart. I'm with the Energy Research and Development Group in Tacoma Power. So I'm going to talk about kind of today kind of like the foundation of our strategic plan, briefly talk about some of the programs we offer, and then hopefully have lots of time for questions, because that's where the fun happens. Alrighty, next slide. So Tacoma Power created a strategic plan in response to Senate Bill 1512. This is a Washington State bill. Prior to 1512, it was unclear whether we had authorization to get involved in electric transportation. 1512 clarified that. It did kind of two big things. One is it kind of created a maximum cap, so we can't increase net cost to ratepayers in excess of 1/4%. So we don't have an unlimited budget, but got a fairly healthy budget. And it also identified that utilities consider a wide range of options when thinking about programs, to all customer classes, impact this utility power system, retail reliability, interoperability, and customer experience. So we get to consider all that stuff in the programs that we put together. All right, next slide. So our strategic plan is a little different from a lot of other types of documents. It didn't focus on specific programs having specific budgets. It was purposefully vague. And one of the reasons is because there's so much change in the technology and the programs that are out there and the availability. We needed to have a lot of flexibility in order to best address our customers' needs. So to kind of did do that, our strategic plan really kind of focused on the big principles, setting up a vision so that it really kind of positioned the group to kind of achieve the benefits for our customers and community, setting up guiding principles and putting together clarity. So developing standard and consistency. What these kind of mean is that we have specific things we look at when we put together programs. We do a cost benefit test in kind of a similar manner across programs. And we make sure that kind of as we do this, the work that we do is aligning with the long-term utility of the directives. And then finally, input. We did do a public input process as part of this and allowed us to collect input when creating a plan. Next slide, please. So out of this plan is created a whole bunch of different electric transportation efforts. And I like to really summarize all these efforts as really looking for three goals. The first goal is to maintain system power reliability. We have to keep the lights on at all times. The second goal is to keep costs low for all customers. This means that we're not going to increase rates on one group of customers to kind of pay for products and services used by a separate group of customers. And the third is to maximize the use of our clean electricity. We're a predominantly hydroelectric utility. We have combined with a lot of wind. So it's our power source is 97% carbon free. So how do we maximize that for our customers? And we ran a variety of programs. and studies. One is a microgrid study looking at one of our local school districts of what happens when we electrify their entire bus fleet. What is it? Because the answer to that question is very different, whether you're looking to electrify 3 buses or 70 buses. We have a home charging program. The purpose of the program is to get customers into level 2 charging, and we have a couple of different paths to get them there. We don't focus on any specific type of equipment because honestly, we're not there yet. We don't have a time of use rate. We don't have like a DERM system to plug things into. But in order for customers to do any type of managed charging, they need the 240 outlet, or at least a 240 service at a minimum. So we're focusing on getting customers prepared for the next generation of programs. Fleet charging is something that we've looked at, and we have a pilot right now. It's kind of undefined what it is, but if people come to us with a good idea, we're more than happy to fund it. Shore power is a project where instead of coming up with an incentive, we actually changed our rate structure to accommodate shore power, which made it easier for the Port of Tacoma to kind of allocate the costs for using shore power to other ships, and was really key in getting buy-in from their tenants and terminal operators in order to kind of start pursuing funding. We've got a multi-family charging program where we have received lots of grant funding, and we generally put it into multifamily charging where we can go out and kind of put charging in multifamily properties that generally wouldn't have a lot of charging applicability. We do a lot of community engagement, and we have a community charging program where we're putting out chargers on street lighting poles. We are very involved in electrofuels, so hydrogen, different liquid hydrogen carriers. We do education, and we have recently launched a school bus incentive program for school districts looking to purchase electric school buses with the intent of trying to get them to a place where they're moving to a network charging, or at least have some type of smart charging apparatus so those school buses are charged smartly instead of just adding to the school district's demand charges. So that kind of finals it out. There's one more slide we can go ahead and flip to, which is the kind of the obligatory thank you slide. Thanks for listening to me today, and I'm hoping to talk more about this during the Q&A phase. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jeremy. Great presentation and some really good information there, and lots of robust programs. I'm excited to hear more about those. So I don't see any immediate questions for you in the chat, so we'll go ahead and move on to our last presenter before we get into the roundtable discussion, which we're going to have ample time for. I'm excited for that. So last up, we have Phil Cameron from Energy Conservation Works. Phil, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. And thanks to be and forth for the opportunity to talk a little bit about what we're doing in our little teeny corner of the world. I am piping in from Jackson, Wyoming. And this is kind of one of our glory shots here on the northeastern side of our valley, looking down the Buffalo Fork River at the Grand Tetons. But we are decidedly a very rural setting. I'm based in Teton County, Wyoming, and we serve our county broadly with an array of programs, and also portions of the county to our south. If you want to move to the next slide, please. And I just note, I apologize for some of the formatting. We had to convert from a PDF to a PowerPoint on this. But I'm decidedly not presenting as a representative of a utility. Rather, I'm presenting as a representative of a collaborative effort that includes the cooperative utility Lower Valley Energy, our Teton County, Wyoming government, and the town of Jackson government. So we have a tri-party agreement between these entities, and we exist as a joint powers board. So we are a governmental entity, but we often have one foot in the government and the non-government space in our programming within the community. We were created out of a collaborative effort between the town and county, to which Lower Valley Energy was invited in the early 2000s on a community-wide evaluation of emissions and energy usage. And our organization was codified approximately 10 years ago. And we serve across sectors, including transportation, but we provide leadership education and implementation specific to energy conservation, energy efficiency, renewable energy, and reductions in emissions. And so you can see what constitutes our board is representatives from each of those organizations, as well as 5 citizen community members, one of which was actually a longstanding board member of Western Resource Advocates as well, and is our current board chair. But our cooperative has approximately 34,000 services across 5 different counties in 2 states. We are the easternmost member of the Bonneville Power administration, and about 60% of the electricity delivered through the co-op is within our community. We have a small population of about 23,000 in our county, but we have an exceedingly high visitation of about 3.5 million visitors that come here primarily for our national parks, but also some wintertime visitation for skiing. So we have an exceedingly strong power of place to influence activities elsewhere, and we try to leverage that. We can jump on to the next slide here. And so what I've done, and I just did this by highlighting some key programs by order of operations. And one of the things I want to emphasize is that all of our programs that we're going to talk about involve one or all of the joint powers partners, in addition to additional community action partners. One of which that I'd like to recognize and strongly encourage those of you listening is to engage with your Department of Energy Clean Cities coalitions if you have one in your region. They've been an invaluable partner on transportation projects in general and electrification specifically. And they actually delivered an electrification plan to our town of Jackson government in 2012 that laid the stage for our future efforts on public EVSE installation, which we launched in 2014 with our first 4 public free access electric vehicle charging level 2 sites around the community. These were in fairly prominent locations that were situated appropriately with available utilities per the plan and recommendations of Clean Cities and the utility. As we've grown over time from those initial 4 sites within the town core, we have 17 different locations throughout the community that provide free level 2 charging. And I do note that all of those accounts are town of Jackson or Teton County, and they are enrolled in a voluntary 100% green power program with our utility. So those electrons through purchase agreements are delivered from micro hydro projects within our local cooperative grid. And then in 2017, we began offering commercial energy efficiency financing. That does include the opportunity for businesses to finance EVSE infrastructure. And then we're very excited about a program that launched in 2020, but an electric transit pilot. Again, we have a small community. We have an exceedingly robust transit system for a community of our size to serve key market segments, the skier usage at the ski resort. In particular, we have a free town shuttle throughout the community, and then we also have commuter service to Teton Valley and Teton County, Idaho, and Lincoln County, Wyoming, which are key bedroom communities. But about 30% of our transit fleet converted over to Proterra EV buses in 2020, and that's going to grow over the subsequent years. Our role in that was predominantly focused on funding the charging infrastructure for that program through 2 restricted public energy funds that we help our town and county government manage. One of the key kind of things I call out about that I think is really important to highlight is we're going into a bit of an analysis on how to manage demand around it. When we plug all of those buses in at once, when 10 Proterra buses go online, there are significant demand charges associated. So we're working with the Idaho National Laboratory, with the START Transit Authority, with the town government, with the utility, to try to understand how we can better deploy smart charging to stagger that load and those demand charges. We can jump onto the next slide here, please. And then just some last key points that we've rolled out. Our fleet, we took our first foray into free public DC fast charging, and that is currently free, but that is going to eventually, due to some of the demand, fees associated with DC fast charging will ultimately come into a paid structure that covers the cost of delivering the service to the community. Again, those are green power account associated. We modified a residential energy efficiency loan program that we renewed with our state energy authority in 2021 to include a provision that enables homeowners to finance level 1 or level 2, ideally charging to help with that upfront financial barrier to a degree, and it benefits from on-bill financing with the utility. And then later in 2021, in partnership with Lower Valley Energy, with our local conservation district, and again with our Clean Cities Coalition, Yellowstone Teton Clean Cities, we launched the EV Experience, which is a program that enables any member of the cooperative utility to borrow an electric vehicle for between 1 and 3 days to truly experience how an electric vehicle fits into their lifestyle here. And it has been a roaring success, and it's booked out about 6 months at this point. So we're adding some ride and drives and shorter experiences with that. And then one of the last things looking forward that I'm excited to highlight, and this particularly hits on one of the comments earlier about availability versus accessibility, but we're working with our local housing authority. We have a major housing crisis in the community, a very high cost of living here, and accordingly, we have a very robust public and a private workforce housing programs in the community. And so we're partnering with those workforce housing partners to look at 3 different approaches to e-mobility that are going to be incorporated into their newest project that's just recently broken ground. We're very excited to have BEF's partnership and support on this pilot project, and it's going to provide an on-site electric vehicle car share program for residents of the deed restricted units. It is going to include some on-site level 2 charging at the residential site. And then it is also going to include an e-bike lending library that will enable residents to have access to a pool of e-bikes through more than likely the 4th mobility app. And we can skip to the next slide. And those are just some of the high points we wanted to share today from our corner of the BPA world.
Kelly, you're muted.
Thank you. At this point, thank you, Phil. I invite all of the speakers to go ahead and turn your cameras on, and we'll move into the roundtable portion of our discussion here. And I know that we have some predetermined questions from Thomas. So I'm also going to invite Thomas from BEF back on the line as well to kick us off, and then we can sprinkle in some questions from the chat as well. So please do keep those coming. And I already see 1 or 2 in there as well, but maybe just to kick things off, would you like to go ahead and ask your first question, Thomas?
Why don't you go ahead and why don't we address this first 2 in the chat, and then I can start with some prepared questions after that.
Okay, sure thing. All right, so then this first question is for you, Jeremy. So is the multifamily charging effort a DI or rebate model? I'm guessing that is a direct incentive. What does DI stand for? Direct incentive?
I'm going to assume direct install.
Okay.
So we went with the rebate model with the intent that the rebate would cover 100% of the cost. And one of the challenges that we have as being a public utility in a public agency is if we can do the construction, it's considered a public works project, which basically increases, kind of pulls in a bunch of purchasing requirements as well as regulatory requirements and prevailing wage requirements. We're finding we're being able to kind of like see more projects done if we just give the customers an incentive and let them take care of the contracting part of it. The other challenge that we have is just trying to manage construction projects. It's just very time intensive. And for us to try to manage 40 construction projects, each at a multifamily home, it'd be overwhelming. So we went with the rebate model.
Great. Thank you. All right. And then this last question is for anybody to take a pass at from Cindy. For any of the speakers, do you have links to best practices on community outreach messaging around EVs to promote adoption? And I'll actually say from the fourth side, I can probably share some resources out as a resource to follow up this webinar today. We should have some on our website that I can direct you to, but certainly would love to hear if there's anything from the utility led side of things, or from Aaron in your work on your report most recently.
And maybe a different way to phrase that, because it's certainly important, is you know, what is your marketing? You have these programs, but what are you doing to get the word out to the people who can use those programs, whether that's things on your website or other types of media? I'm curious how you promote.
This is one for me. But some of the programs that we have are new, like the car sharing, and a lot of individuals are still not aware that we have them. So we're looking at doing it. Kind of like having individuals ride these vehicles and having videos on our webpage, and having individuals ride them. Ideally, even those who like, I don't like electric vehicles, these things I don't think they're going to work. And then, oh, well, these are actually, they're okay. And they do this and they do that, because then you're taking, and having individuals who look like the audience that you're trying to target. We're thinking about having, members of the government, but it seems that you want just regular individuals riding these vehicles and having that. And then language, I guess, as well, just accessibility in different languages so people can see that if it's something that they can be part of. That is one approach that we're looking at taking for that specific one.
I would just add in that one of the things that we're trying to do is
that's such a good idea. Yeah, totally. Like, yeah.
Just a moment there, Phil.
Totally, yeah.
A short reminder to please mute yourself if you are an attendee, if you're not speaking. Thank you. All right.
It's great. I was like a ventriloquist for a second. But what I was going to say is one of the things that we're trying to do is really hear from the users on our EV Experience program. So we've worked in collaboration with the utility, with our Clean Cities group, with all of our partners to frame the messaging as we see it. And we also lean on the Clean Cities resources and things like that. But part of one of the requirements of EV Experience is the pre and post survey. So we can understand both, in a quantitative and qualitative manner, the impressions people brought into the experience and then the ones they took away with it. And we're also capturing their words about the experience and into testimonials. And so we'll be creating those and incorporating those into our promotional materials and our educational materials on EVs, really putting their words out there. And then one of the other things we did was we created, along with the utility and all of our partners for that particular program, some very basic educational videos. And this is stuff that's all linked via QR code in the EV loaner vehicle, where they can listen to a 2 or 3 minute video that talks about key components of the electric vehicle, both its use and its benefits. And so those are things that we can certainly share, along with some of the promotional or educational materials we've developed for that particular program.
I wanted to add just one thing on this topic of customer outreach and education. Is in our paper we do talk about this and identify what we think are some best practices, and those are really having a multifaceted outreach approach. So not just relying on a website, but doing all the different forms of communication that utilities have at their disposal to try to reach as much customers as possible. And I think it's particularly important with customers who might not have as much access to information, and tailoring different approaches to lower income customers, offering services in a bilingual manner if that's if there's a significant amount of bilingual Spanish speaking customers, like we see a lot in the Southwest. And then also I just want to say, as now that we've gotten a year plus into seeing some of the utilities in our region, we've seen some utilities do pretty well with uptake in their programs, and some are doing, very poorly. And I think there's definitely a relation between the ones that are doing poorly and poor education and outreach. That you can have great programs, but customers don't know that they're out there. It's not doing any good. And unfortunately, that is happening with some utilities. So it's a really, really important issue to address.
Yeah, so as far as Tacoma, I like to look back. It's been a couple of rough years for outreach. The utility is focused on COVID outreach, and there's been a lot of challenges as far as, we've had a payment moratorium here for a couple of years that just came in place. So a lot of that stuff has taken up a lot of our corporate communication structures. But we've been pretty successful. We've leveraged our existing relationships with multifamily property owners. We've forged those with our energy efficiency programs. We've done a lot of one-to-one discussions with school districts and business districts as far as where to locate public chargers and getting them on board with promoting things. And we've done this besides our standard utility channels of, such as our newsletters. We participate in all the major community events, our social media accounts. So we've been active in kind of the normal stuff, but a lot of our approach really has been to leverage our existing relationships with existing customers as much as we can.
Thanks, everyone.
Kelly, I see another question there in the chat if you want to.
Yeah, I also see Juan has his hand raised. Did you want to add something else onto that last question?
Yeah, thank you. I forgot to mention that one thing that we've done at EWIP is that we partner with a local electric vehicle association, the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association, and we've been providing through them monthly classes on electric vehicles, really nice comprehensive classes. They're virtual and they're open to all the local utilities in our area. So we've had, I think, like 6 or 7 utilities that also, we just share the link. And so every month their customers can register and sign up. And that has been a great way with COVID, really low cost, because this group just wants to promote electric vehicles, and utilities can be invited to talk about their programs specifically. And then afterwards, it's like a question and answer piece for customers to ask. And again, just because it's such a regional, started with EWEB and then it went to EWEB, EPUD, and just other utilities. So it's been a great approach, low cost, to get information out there to individuals.
Yeah, thanks for adding that in, Juan. I think it's a great point too, because it's a different audience touch point for your customers. So they're hearing from their peers and their utility. So, they're getting kind of different messaging based on who's doing that outreach. And another hand raised from Aaron.
All right, struggling there. I wanted to respond to Kevin's question, which is about the used EV rebates. And I think, where there have been several utilities in our region that are offering rebates for used EVs that are less than, so there's a rebate for new cars and then a lower rebate for used cars. And as far as the requirements, the ones I'm thinking of are Black Hills and Excel Energy, both in Colorado, and there are not requirements related to mileage. The requirements that they have are related to where the vehicle is, purchased, has to be purchased in state, and some other things around the cost of the vehicle, but nothing on mileage. But I think that's a good thing to flag. I think given the state of the used EV market in almost anywhere in the country, being relatively small, I think there was kind of a concern about limiting the stock of used vehicles further by putting in place a mileage requirement.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'll open up that question to others on the line and just note that, here in Oregon, we also have a state level rebate that can be applied to used vehicles. So I'm curious, not to put Juan on the spot, but from an Oregon perspective, is that something you've considered in your rebates to, be able to build upon other incentives that are available here in Oregon? And then, Phil and Jeremy, if you have anything to add on your end too.
Yeah, we don't have the electric vehicle rebates, but we definitely share the resources that are available on our website. But if we were to have an electric vehicle rebate, we definitely try to combine it in a full full transparency, I was typing in something for the chat when you sent and you said Juan, and then I go, here I go. So hopefully I'm answering the question that you presented.
You did, yes, thank you.
So
I would, oh, go ahead.
go on, Phil. I'm good.
Oh, I was just going to note, you know, we do not have the fortune of having anything at the state level or any sort of clean fuels plans or programs or funding mechanisms from the state level. So, you know, everything that we've talked about, we've had to be creative with our you know, limited funding mechanisms on the programs and projects that we've used. Our local Clean Cities Coalition did have a rebate program on electric vehicle purchases and also had a charging program where they were providing level 2 charging equipment for free. So we're fortunate to have that as a past opportunity, but we're continually trying to figure out how, as a public agency, we can give rebates with some statutorial limitations in the Wyoming Constitution about the use of public funds. So we're going to continue to try to get creative on that front, or to partner on that front to be able to deliver that. But we do have some limitations with the Wyoming Constitution on what we can and cannot do as a public agency.
Yeah, I got to follow up on that question. Tacoma doesn't do rebates on rolling stock. It's just kind of out of scope with where we're at with our various rebate programs. The state is in the process of rulemaking for low carbon fuel standards, so I expect there'll be something there, and we're more than happy to promote that. We've worked with our larger customers to kind of partner with them on grant applications to secure grant funding for things like hostler trucks down at the Port of Tacoma. But you know, Phil, to your note, with like gift of public funds, we've got the same rules here. You know, when I look at like the maximum utility value of a EV, you know, it's like $600, $700 utility. Throwing $600 on the hood of a $50,000 car just doesn't make sense. It's not enough to make anybody change their mind or make a different decision. It's just a subsidy to people who can afford the $35,000 car. So.
I just add, I know we have representatives from all 4 states, but in Oregon, and Kelly, you'll know the program better than I do, but I think for low income, Oregon's got a $2,500 state rebate that can be paired with a $7,500 tax credit at the federal level. But if you're low income, that state rebate is an extra $5,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, so up to an extra, well, up to a total of 7,500 at the state level if you're low income, and that can be applied to a used vehicle. But yeah, the standard rebate will double to 5,000 for low income individuals.
Yeah, so that's a great program. I wanted to ask, moving to a different question here. Jeremy mentioned the low carbon fuel standard or the clean fuels program. You know, California instituted their low carbon fuel standard program in 2011. So it's been going for more than a decade now. Oregon implemented its program in 2016. And then Washington, I believe, will implement their clean fuels program next year. So Juan, you mentioned that your programs are funded by the clean fuels program. For those people who are not in Oregon, maybe you could just touch real quickly on kind of how that works for the utility. I know it's a non-rate based source of funds, which is hopeful. And then kind of how, you know, the extent to which those funds, it's a lot of funds that go to the different utilities who have a lot of EVs registered. So maybe Juan, you can cover that. And then I'm interested to hear how Tacoma is maybe preparing for the clean fuels program in Washington.
So I think you mentioned my name first, so not first, but at least to indicate that I should go first.
Yeah, you go first, please. It's
a fantastic program. For example, the community grants, we would not be able to support it in another way. They're $25,000 grants. The electric bicycle, the load that you can get from the electric bicycle, if you were just like a super biker, maybe it's like $15 a year. It's not much. So we could not defend that to a limited income customer and say, hey, this is beneficial to you. But us providing a $300 rebate on this makes absolute sense. So it allows us to get more creative to go outside traditional return on investment lends us to look at programs and just expand what we have. So it's not only do you get credits for the vehicles, but if you put charging stations like DCFC level 2, you can also get credits for that. For our service territories, it's around 14 cents a kilowatt hour for every kilowatt hour that we provide for charging. So it definitely covers the operational cost. So even when we offer free charging on level 2 and somebody may raise their hand and say, why are you providing free charging? Well, we are recovering our costs. So then it allows us again to defend these efforts, to not say that they're pulling from our rate customers. And so, yeah, I cannot say enough about just the positive benefits of this program that Oregon has, the EQ. So yeah, thank you, the EQ, for providing this to utilities.
And one, just to get a little more specific, you receive credits for each electric vehicle that's registered in your service territory, correct? The credits are worth a certain number of dollars, hundreds of dollars per vehicle. And just as an example, how many EVs are registered in EWEB's service territory at this point?
Right, well, the spreadsheet, yeah. 2484 as of the end of 2021. And
So almost
yeah.
2,500 EVs, yeah.
So each EV gets around 3 point and change credits, and each of those credits is worth $120 or so currently. So it's not a small amount of money, and the projections are to increase. So it's a decent amount of money that we'll have for all kinds of electrification efforts.
Excellent. And Jeremy, have you all started to think about the impact of the Clean Fuels program in Washington?
Oh, absolutely. We're super excited for when this thing rolls out, and we're probably going to go crazy rolling out program designs. It's still in rulemaking, so we don't know what the exact rules and regulations are going to be. We're looking at all kinds of public-private partnerships. We're looking at, we have to spend certain amounts of money on state programs, which likely might be cash on the hood incentives. We'll see what the Department of Transportation comes up with. We're looking to partner with, EVSE vendors. We're looking at opportunities to potentially create like a loan fund type thing where we may be like, we'll pay for the upfront costs of the infrastructure and allow customers to reimburse us with the low carbon fuel standard credits as time goes on. But we don't know the rules yet, so it's hard for me to say we're going to do program A, B, or C, but we're looking at them all, and we're going to do some great things with it when it comes down.
Excellent. I don't know if Aaron or if you or Phil have anything to add there. You guys don't have those. Oh, well, Wyoming doesn't have that program yet, right?
No. I don't know that how long that'll take for us, but I covet.
Yeah. Moving on to another question here. Of course, EVs are growing rapidly, especially in the light duty space, because they're available. And I think I read somewhere that 5% of new vehicle sales now are electric vehicles nationwide, and that percentage is probably higher on the East and West Coast and a little lower in the Midwest and the South. But when we think about that, the load growth for EVs over the next 30 years, but even in the next 10 years, is going to be significant. And I'm wondering if the different utilities have thought about capacity issues in the local distribution system as EV growth happens over time.
So Thomas, we've talked a lot about that internally. I think the key thing that you said, though, is over time, adding an electric vehicle to a residential home is kind of like the same as adding a new water heater or a hot tub or some other type of load. It's not huge. It's like 3,000 kilowatt hours a year. It tends to be a little peaky. If we had 20,000 customers run out today and buy EVs and I'll plug them in at 6 o'clock in the afternoon or evening, that would be a big problem. But that's not going to happen because this is going to happen over like a 20-year time period. So we're not panicked over it. We're kind of in a watch and see and adjust state. One of the reasons that we're offering the program that we do for at-home charging to get customers to using a 240 volt outlet is so that we have the ability to shift the load in the future. If we come up with a load shifting program, I don't know what that looks like, managed charging, time of use rate, whatever. They have to have level 2 to do it. Because with level 1, you pretty much got to plug in and charge all evening. Every hour counts. But with level 2, you're charging 3 or 4 hours. It's easy enough to shift that, start charging at midnight. You're full by 5 in the morning and ready to go to work.
This,
Go ahead.
sorry, Phil, would you like to go?
Please.
Yeah, so I would echo the same thing. We did an electrification study, and the increase is going to be manageable. It's not like we're going to go and wake up tomorrow and we'll have all these electric vehicles. ODO, the Oregon Department of Energy, is doing a pilot program where they're able to provide vehicle data at the transformer level, feeder level, and so that allows us to get an understanding of where these things are taking place. And be able to manage that. So that would be extremely helpful than what the data that we may have at this point. We have a program data, but the program data doesn't necessarily capture everybody that is out there. And also considering EE, energy efficiency, and electric vehicles, so electrification for that matter. So you put on a heat pump water heater, you're decreasing the load from 45 to 500 watts. The average increase in kW for an electric vehicle, maybe 1.3 kW, as our electrification study was showing. So there's ways to start addressing this through various channels. Demand response may be another one, time of use, encouraging our programs, encourage on the commercial side, open ADR, for example, standards, so that we can be ready for demand response in the future. We don't have a price signal for that, but we definitely try to be intentional in making sure that we have the mechanics to be able to support it in the future. And a great thing would be also something like the CTA 2045 for vehicle charging infrastructure, because right now, if you're relying on Wi-Fi and all those things, those are not always consistent. So we definitely try to push for that as well. So I think kind of like what Tacoma said, and we're watching, there's different tools at our disposal that we can use to address any potential changes, and having the intentional approach definitely makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah, I just to chime in, I'd love to hear that discussion around marrying EDSE with energy efficiency and conservation programs. You know, if you can make the case that we have a very high per capita electricity consumption here, given our climate and our significant reliance on electric resistance heat across the community in a lot of spaces, but there's a tremendous opportunity to marry those things, and we try to highlight those in our engagement on our home energy auditing and financing programs. So like kind of crossing into those other program areas now, but to help homeowners understand that with reasonable conservation measures or equipment upgrades, they could essentially absorb the cost of charging or the footprint of their car charging through taking those measures, and it'll be a wash at the end of the day, and they're effectively driving for free based on their conservation steps. One of the other things we've talked about too with these preliminary opportunities for financing and any rebate structures we're looking at for EV chargers is to have a voluntary anonymized data collection around those, so that we can understand how, not just generally, but how people are using their charging here, and understand time of use that might later inform a separate rate class for EV charging or time of use incentives around charging.
Excellent. So it sounds like, the growth in the distribution system will be slow enough that everyone will be able to manage. I think Jeremy mentioned, and also Phil mentioned, larger fleets that are moving towards, electrifying more quickly. I know Franklin Pierce in Jeremy's area, looking at electrifying school buses. And certainly the vehicles that are driving a lot, those, you get a lot of bang for your buck on carbon reduction when you've got vehicles that are driving 15, 20, 25,000 miles a year. And those may be, transit buses, school buses. So just your experience on the challenges. Another one I'll mention, I think, City of Pasco, I think is their school district is talking about having 30 electric school buses within the next, it's either 5 or 10 years. So the challenges of looking at, specific sites and specific fleets that are looking at pulling a lot of energy to just one place. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
I could just chime in, as I mentioned in my earlier comments, kind of our best case study is around our transit fleet. And this was something on the front end when they were pursuing the FTA Low No grant that went toward the buses. We did an initial analysis that included demand considerations and really tried to impress upon them the importance of staggering charging, where if they plug half of that electric fleet in, they're going to have one cost per mile to charge those vehicles. If they plug them all in at once without staggering the charging, their cost per mile on a fuel cost basis doubles. So, there was a really important component of managing their understanding of their potential fuel cost savings. They're obviously still saving over diesel, but they paid a lot more for those buses. So understanding that side of things. And then also, I think one thing that we learned is being very clear with your EVSE provider on how smart those charging systems really are. We're looking and working closely with them on that now. But our understanding of the ability to manage that demand load right out of the gates and the reality were very different. Were very different things, and so we're looking at some stopgap measures to manage that. Looking at how the drivers are plugging in, when they're plugging in, things like that, and just increasing awareness on the usage there. But it's critical. Those demand charges are significant, and they dramatically impact the cost benefit of electrification of the fleet. And the other thing is future-proofing those facilities. Our facility with the transition to electric vehicles, a 5 or 7 year old facility, is maxing out a service that was supposed to accommodate an expansion of the facility. So that's another thing to be aware of and fully transparent.
Yeah, I think fleet is where we're going to see some really cool technology stuff come in, and where it's really going to be necessary. Things like fast chargers with battery backups, things with like really ruggedly managed charging systems. Looking at that school district that we're talking about with Franklin Pierce, you're 70 school buses. You can have if you manage them, you can get a demand. You can have it's like a 1.25 megawatt load. If you don't manage them, it's twice that much. It's 2.5 megawatts. And that also has downstream problems on the grid too. So whereas I'm very bullish about the residential market not having problems, fleets are going to be interesting because they all have their own unique locational issues and capacity constraints, and they're large enough that they can start looking at like a system level problems. So it's going to be, there's all kinds of neat tech that we can potentially set out there. And it may be that a lot of the fleets right now, school buses, for example, currently have this like hub and spoke model where you have a single location and you've got all the buses at that location. That may need to shift to something different where you have smaller concentrations. You have 3 or 4 concentrations throughout the district. And we're not even talking about the big stuff yet, because if we start talking about like electrifying drayage trucks and Class 8 trucking, they're talking about the new megawatt standards where you potentially have a 1 or 2 megawatt charging facility. If you have 5 parking spots that have a 2.5 megawatt plug each on them, that's a huge capacity utility. We have to figure out some way to deal with that. And batteries may not be the answer. It might be hydrogen.
Excellent. Okay, if people have questions, keep entering them in the chat, but I have a few more here that I've prepared that hopefully should be interesting. So another piece around EVs and decarbonization, EVs can really help to decarbonize the transportation sector, but only if the electricity is renewable and coming from renewable sources. So I'm wondering at the utility level, if you all are tracking the carbon intensity or the renewable percentage. I know a lot of BPA utilities obviously have a lot of hydro, which is a huge benefit. But if the utilities are actually tracking that mix of their electricity on their system to determine how beneficial, how decarbonizing the use of electric vehicles is in their service territories.
Casually, I guess. I mean, we have to calculate that stuff for the state. There's a lot of, I'm not involved in that specifically, but we do calculate it. And if people are interested, we tell them about it, but we don't have like a program where we're quantifying carbon reductions by electric vehicles. We will indirectly have a program because that's how the low carbon fuel standard is going to work. So we'll kind of have an estimate of that through the low carbon fuel standard, but that's kind of where that's at with us.
Yeah, and I would just say that, the utility is tracking their annual grid mix, and they're exceedingly reliant and benefit greatly from access to BPA power. That is a predominant source of electricity. And then beyond that, almost all of the additional purchases are part of the Voluntary Green Power Program. So they're purchasing 100% from facilities like this one behind me, the Horse Butte Wind Farm in Idaho, and several others. So we're pretty comfortable with our performance being shaving a little bit for more off the carbon intensity of the BPA grid mix here. But it's not something the utility is specifically tracking or delivering on an information basis to its members. On our public infrastructure that we've helped invest in and roll out on the free charging, it's pretty straightforward because all of those accounts are associated with the Green Power Program and our local micro hydro. And so we do try to emphasize that component in general. How clean our grid mix is and why that is from an emissions basis. This is an ideal location to use an electric vehicle. And then further on those public infrastructure items, that those are, effectively green powered charging sites.
This is an interesting question, and I would say a complex one to fully answer. So we track our fuel mix and kind of like we have to report it to the state. And our average is about 0.02 metric tons of CO2e per megawatt hour. The statewide is 0.36, so quite a magnitude difference. But when you think about electrification, whether it's transportation or building electrification, when you're on the margin and now you're exposed to the market, is your fuel for that new EV, for that new electric home, really coming from your traditional fuel mix, or are you on the market and really tapping onto that dirtier resource in that sense? So, what is really the value? People say, let's electrify, that's going to be fantastic. Well, it may sound good, but I think we have to be more intentional and on a yearly basis, mapping what truly is happening with our fuel mix, where we're having that and the actual exposure. But then, say yearly, well, then should we go monthly? Should we go daily? Because then you start changing that. So it's an interesting question because as we have more and more electrification, you really expose more and more to the market, depending on how you get your electricity per utility. And that's going to change really how clean that may be. So electrification, just because we're 90% carbon neutral, but that may not be always true. And of course, time of use when you're charging that vehicle and all that. But yeah, so that question I think is kind of complex. And we, as a utility, we have to do a better job of really capturing that. If we were to report, this is how much your electric vehicle is actually saving on carbon. This is how much your ductless heat pump from changing from an electric furnace is really doing. So I think it's a complex question to fully answer. We are tracking it in some way, but I don't think it tells the full story what is really taking place. Thanks.
And just to add to that, I think we talk about how fuel cost is lower for electric vehicles, electricity is cheaper, but also the fuel efficiency of the electric vehicles is incredibly better, right? I mean, light duty EVs being 100-mile equivalent. So there's a benefit to the reduced pollution, reduced carbon pollution, as well as air pollution on that front too. The last question I have here is around equity, and so I know each of you touched on that a little bit. And Aaron, you have a good overview of lots of different areas and programs involving equity. And then of course, the three utilities have really unique situations. Jackson, Wyoming is certainly different than Eugene or Tacoma. So I'm curious if you all could each just take a minute or so to dive into the real challenges you see around making these programs and these opportunities truly equitable to all the members, all the customers of your utilities.
Can start. We only know what we know. So I have some gaps that I'm aware of in social equity and a lot that I don't. So one way that we're trying to address that is the community grants, because then we're going to have these institutions that will see the gaps that they're experts at, bringing it up to us that we may be blind to, and provide efforts that target that specific demographic where I would never have a chance of doing that. And then that can lead to better programs. Aaron touched on his presentation about vehicle ownership. And so moving away from that, what is a way that you can provide access outside of vehicle ownership? And partnerships like Fourth bringing the car sharing effort to us, and with DEF as well, that allows us to go in a different way and be creative. And again, thanks to clean fuel credits, we are able to do that because the value that we're looking at it is through different lenses. So I don't want to take too long since we don't have that much time, but that's what I would add to this discussion. Thanks.
So if you look at our service territory, we've got about 80% of our customers are residential. About 35% of those customers are considered low income per federal guidelines. The city of Tacoma has invested a significant amount of money to build an equity index or equity map that kind of like maps out areas that have been historically underinvested and as a result have negative outcomes today. So that kind of helps us improve our lens of what's going on. And when we put together programs, you try to figure out how to make sure that everybody can participate somehow, and different people may get benefits in different ways. So we look at the equity map, we make sure that the money is going into areas where, underinvestment has historically happened. Kevin earlier asked if it's a rebate or an incentive, or a direct install. It's a rebate, but the rebates are generally greater in those underinvested areas. A lot of times that helps make up for things like the distribution system isn't in the same state as it is in other areas in the service territory. So we're always looking to try to do better on the equity and to correct for past errors. We use the equity map to kind of help guide us. And we try to offer a range of programs and ways that customers can participate so that, you may not there may be no advantage for a low income customer for a special shore power rate financially, but they also live in that airshed that's heavily impacted by ships idling at port. And if we can kind of work to reduce some of the emissions there, that's an indirect way that we can help folks. We're also looking at car shares and other things too.
Yeah, I would say that having expanded a little bit on some of the constraints within which we have to operate on our funding, we're continually looking for mechanisms that can enable us on the EVSE side to provide more equitable and complete access. And I would say that this is an area in which we have a great opportunity for growth and improvement. We are excited to work on this multifamily e-mobility project, and I think that is an encouraging first step. But it is landlocked to that one project. So we're continuing to evaluate this, and frankly, we have better incentives through the BPA program to work with those community members that have a high energy burden on energy efficiency and conservation in the built environment right now than we do on transportation electrification. So we're just getting our toes into that water, shifting our mindset, starting to partner with the right community action organizations to better serve the whole of our community. But I think we have a tremendous opportunity to go much further.
Great. Aaron, you have something to add there on this question?
Yeah, definitely. I think, this is something that I spent a lot of thinking about. And I think, you just have to start by acknowledging the reality that it's just a lot harder a lower income customer to own an electric vehicle, and that just creates so many barriers. And I think it's just when the way that we've tried to kind of frame it is when you're thinking about advancing equity in the utility transportation electrification plan, it's almost like shifting the way that you think about it, because you need to go further in order to meet those customers where they're at. And like just providing, we always advocate, increased rebates. That's like kind of like the bare minimum. I mean, I think because the barriers to even owning an EV are so much more significant, if it's just, offering larger rebates, if a customer doesn't own an EV or they don't have any access to transportation electrification, they aren't going to take advantage of those. So it's about addressing equity in all components, and education and outreach is a huge part of that. It's about thinking about, like we've said already, like different forms of transportation that can, so that transportation electrification can be accessible to other customers through like electrified public transportation or electrified micro mobility, and just meeting those customers where they're at and not thinking about it through the lens of traditional EV ownership. And one really specific thing that I would plug, I don't think that has been said, it's about the way that rebates are structured. A lot of lower income customers don't have excess capital sitting around where they can make a large investment in an EV charger. So making rebates that are only available after the purchase has been made is going to make those rebates inaccessible to a lot of customers. So offering point of sale rebates, which can be a little bit more difficult to administer, but offering point of sale rebates can allow customers to be able to immediately see the reduction in the upfront costs. And that's really important, whether that rebate is for a charger or for an electric vehicle itself. But yeah, reducing the upfront costs that low-income customers see, because that can just completely turn a lot of customers away.
Excellent. Thank you. We're at time here, just a minute over. I want to thank Aaron and Jeremy and Juan and Phil. This was a great discussion. I hope everyone enjoyed it and learned something. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you to end. I think there's maybe some follow-up emails or whatnot, and then we'll plan, another quarterly EV roundtable in the fall and then one in the winter. So Kelly.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. And thank you to all of our guest panelists and speakers. We really do appreciate your time. Thanks to BEF for sponsoring this webinar series, so we have this space to have these discussions. We're really glad to be able to co-host these with you all. So yeah, as Thomas mentioned, and as you can see in the chat, we'll be sending around the recording of today's discussion, as well as some additional resources that have been provided by our speakers. And we'll look forward to getting an invite out for the next one soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your Thursday.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.